move on to our last session, which is the valedictory session. And may I now invite Mr. Gil Friend, CEO, Natural Logic, and co-founder MySustain Online to address the delegates on call for action. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Naina. Hello, everybody. It's just before dawn here in California. I have not been able to be in the whole conference with you because personal sustainability requires some sleep. But I very much like what I've heard in the last half hour. And the theme of boundaryless collaboration is one that I think is in the background of everything we're talking about here. Thank you for inviting me to share a perspective of some 30 years, excuse me, in this realm that we now call ESG. I hope I can add something valuable to what you've all been discussing all day. I'm going to make 4 points. First, that we are at the end of an epoch in human history and on the verge of a new one. Second, the code red alarm that we've heard from the United Nations is real, but it's just the tip of the iceberg of the challenges that we face as humanity in the world now. Third, the business risk of ESG, I think, is often misconstrued, and we'll talk about that. And fourth, there's a critical path for business to thrive in service to the living world and for India to lead in this new world that's emerging. So first, the end of an age. Nearly 40 years ago, Sheikh Zaki Yamani, who was the foreign minister of OPEC, said that the oil age will end, not because we run out of oil, any more than the Stone Age ended because we ran out of stones. Well, that was prophetic, and here we are now at the end of the fossil fuel age. That's clear to everyone, perhaps not as clear to the companies in that business, but that's a big challenge. We're at the end of the post-war, post-World War II economic order. We're at the end of norms and expectations that we have come to take for granted in the last 70 to 100 years that are spinning around us, turning over into a new world. The Italian revolutionary Antonio Gramsci said 100 years ago, said that we're in the time, said that the old world is dying and the new world has not yet been born. This is the time of monsters. And monsters in mythology, of course, are both horrible and terrifying creatures, but they're also primal generative forces of something new. So here we are at the end of an age with the opportunity to be victims or shapers of the next age. The Code Red report has grabbed attention from around the world. It's a call for all hands on deck. Not just the leaders that we've known as leaders, but everybody to engage on this issue. We even see the language changing before our eyes. So we talked about global warming and then climate change and then climate crisis and then climate emergency, and scientists are now talking about the possibility of climate collapse. That should be strong enough to get all of our attention, but the challenge is worse. The stack is deeper, not just climate, but not just the COVID pandemic, but the possibility of a pandemic era. The ongoing damage to life in the oceans, the destruction of biodiversity around the planet. Here in the United States, maybe worldwide, we've lost 70% of insect species. Rising desertification, more than 40% of the land surface of the earth now denuded of vegetation. The challenge of democracy, the challenge of millions and perhaps tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people on the move in response to climate disruption. And it's worse than that. The report card just issued by one of the climate organizations ranking national performance against the Paris commitments is deeply discouraging. Dozens of companies in the completely unacceptable category. Dozens of companies, countries, I'm sad to say, including India and China, at the generally inadequate response. A dozen countries, including the United States, at the somewhat inadequate response. Only one considered adequate in response to Paris commitments. That's Gambia in Africa. So goals are good or potentially useful, but performance is where it really matters. So beneath the challenge of the climate is the challenge of the soils and water of this planet, the challenge of revegetating and rewilding the living world to which we belong, and in fact, recognizing that we belong to a living world, not just something for us to manage better, but to belong to as living beings on a living planet. Third, we're in a time of prophets. We look at modern prophets. They've been people who've spent years or decades in prison. I think of Nelson Mandela in Africa, Martin Luther King here in the United States. Gandhi, certainly a prophet in our last century. Today, the prophets are in high school. Greta Thunberg, who has woken the world with her just unvarnished, straight-ahead truth about what we face. I wouldn't call myself a prophet, but I've been a scout. And for the past 30 years, I've been running ahead of the tribe, running over the next hill to see what's there and coming back with a report of what might be ahead of us. And frankly, my reports and those of my colleagues have often been discounted. 30 years ago, we were laughed at, ridiculed for being not realistic. But now the things that we've been talking about are on the table in every boardroom on the planet. They're on the agenda in every cabinet chamber in the world. And so it's a very different context, a very different setting that we're living in. What I've seen from my scouting over these past decades is that there are billions of dollars of opportunity in value to be generated by companies that can look at their business not just through the financial statements, but through the ecological lens. The ecological lens of what we've learned from 4 billion years of research and development by Earth's living systems, research and development that is open source, available to all. Just a few principles that we know from that is that the planet runs on income energy, on solar energy, and living systems live on ambient resources, the sun and the wind and the rain that land on that piece of land. We know that systems are circular. There is no waste. The waste of one organism is the food of the next. We are a long way from that, but it's a direction we can move in. We see in living systems that there are no persistent toxic materials. Toxic materials are synthesized briefly when needed and dissociated, not stored and managed as we do in our so-called advanced societies. And we see hierarchies, if you will, that are flat, not stacked. We see pervasive coordination at horizontal levels throughout living systems. So those are some of the guides that we need to attend to as we move forward. Let me use the word profit in another sense, P-R-O-F-I-T. There's resistance among many to the ESG imperative. Some of that is out of fear of it costing profit, that doing good may have to come at the expense of doing well. Well, the truth is, as was on the cover of my book, The Truth About Green Business, you don't have to choose between making money and making sense. My friend, the late Ray Anderson, the founder and CEO of Interface, the multi-billion-dollar flooring company, said famously, if your sustainability initiatives are costing you money, you're doing them wrong. They should be making you money. So you don't have to choose between making money and making sense. You do have to choose what you're really here to do. What you're really here to do. What's your purpose as a business? My hint is that it's not to maximize profits or to maximize return to shareholders. That's the outcome of business. That's not the purpose of business. So being clear on that, as I think some of you have spoken to in this last session, is fundamental. So, there are lots of pieces on the game board here. Let me suggest that there are a small handful of elements that are in the critical path for business, for companies, and frankly, it will be for countries as well. Number one is to flatten your footprint and your negative impact by eliminating waste of all kinds, waste of energy, waste of materials, waste of water, waste of human initiative and creativity, waste of what my friend Chauncey Bell calls coordination waste. This directly improves operating margins and boosts profits and pays for everything else. Second is to align strategy, innovation processes, the actual offerings of the company with purpose that I spoke about a moment ago, with the imperative of climate, with the challenge of circularity and really aligning with the well-being of all life. Number two, and that goes very deep, deeply challenging, but even more valuable than the first. One of our clients, a $6 billion manufacturing company in the United States, as we worked them through this second pillar, by their own estimation, the value that was uncovered was equivalent to at least their existing global revenue. Remarkable. Number three, how do we govern our organizations and coordinate activities among the people in them? To my mind, all hands on deck, which is what the UN is calling for, means everybody on deck, everybody on board, informed, engaged. That's why we've created Sustain Online, is to support that process. Everybody with a clear line of sight that connects their actions to the outcomes generated by the organization, to the shared commitments that really constitute the organization. And the secret here is not only high tech, but also the language technology of how we speak with each other in our organizations and in our lives. Fourth is to share value far more broadly among those who create it. And here's a place where I want to appreciate the leadership in India, where you have several companies, I think about a dozen, that are booking people as assets, not as liabilities on the balance sheet. We commonly hear CEOs that say people are our most important asset, but how do we treat them in our management systems? Typically as liabilities and costs to be minimized rather than a resource to be enhanced. Some of what I've just summarized very quickly, you'll find in the Declaration of Leadership for Sustainable Business that we wrote for a client, some 15 years ago. And obviously for all of this, there's more to be said. And let me finish with a call to action. My mentor, Buckminster Fuller, talked years ago about the metaphor of the trim tab. If you imagine a giant super tanker, a ship longer than multiple football pitches, a huge rudder on the back, a rudder that is so big that the hydraulic pressure to try to push the rudder through the water to turn the ship is too great for our hydraulics to manage. So we invented something called a trim tab, which is a tiny rudder at the rear of the main rudder. The hydraulics move the tiny rudder moves the big rudder moves the ship. Bucky said, call me trim tab. Call me that small rudder that moves the big one that moves the ship. And that's how I've tried to imagine myself, not just as a trim tab, but as a trim tab for trim tabs. I see you all, everyone here on this call, as a trim tab, able to move the great ship of the world and also of India. India, I see as poised for greatness in this realm. You have a booming economy. You have a highly educated population, deep technical capacity, a deep and ancient culture. And so we look to you to step into leadership that, as several of you have said, will take everyone, boundaryless collaboration. We face here an incredible opportunity to either lose the world or to invent a new and better world. That challenge is to reinvent everything that we do. Our technologies, our supply chain systems, our modes of governance, our responsibilities to each other, to lead the world out of the climate crisis to belonging again to the living world as living beings, as members of the family of life. Not just the vague superficiality, if you'll permit me, of ESG and the struggle over metrics and principles and compliance and so forth, but to reinvent how to do business in the service of life and to do that successfully. My friend Bill McDonough, the architect, phrased it this way. He said, the challenge is to love all the children of all species of all time, for all time. And that may sound like poetry, but in fact, it's a guidance system for business. What if we tested everything we do and every investment we make against the challenge of, are we loving all the children of all species for all time? Or as my mentor, Buckminster Fuller, declared years ago, if humanity does not opt for integrity, we are through completely. It is absolutely touch and go. Each one of us could make the difference. That is why I do what I do, Bucky said. And I suspect that that is why you do what you do. There's another world coming. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Thank you.
Fabulous, fabulous, absolutely wonderful. I've scarcely heard a more passionate, a more articulate, a more clear plea for all of us to act together as one species. And I'll never forget this expression, Jill, business in service of life. I think that is such a powerful way. What a great call of action. I mean, as we come to this last part of our fantastic summit, where we are opening it up for questions and answers, and I'm totally amazed by the value that we have conveyed. And it will be really a lost opportunity if each one of the people here does not share this passion with 10 others and make sure that that network shares it with 10 more each. And that's the way that we can create what Jill calls this fantastic small rudder, which will echo and make sure that the whole world actually starts operating from the philosophy of saving our planet for ourselves. Thank you very much. This was stunning.
Thank you, Silesh. And let me just, if I may, broaden the challenge or clarify. Yes, we face the challenge of operating as one species. That's the immediate task before us. But I want to invite us to think about being one species in a multiplicity of billions of species on a living world.
Absolutely right.
Tissue-thin film of life wrapped around an 8,000-mile diameter ball of rock, where we all live interdependently. We think of ourselves as the pinnacle of creation, but we are enmeshed in this web of life with all others rise and fall with them, from the big animals that we see to the tiny animals and plants that we can't. And this is a shift in human consciousness. It's actually an old shift. We've been that way before in our history. We've had a different story recently. And so, yes, all one species, all one life on one living planet.
Absolutely. Fabulous, fabulous.
And the challenge for CII is to translate that, lofty statement into the nuts and bolts of doing business every day, successfully, and profitably, and in service. Thank you, Silesh.
So nice. And I must say that Snowcap has volunteered to support anyone on this call with a very special, tailor-made effort to get you started on the journey that was defined and described in this entire seminar. And I'm sure CII will reach out to every one of you and communicate to you what they, as our sponsors, have generously decided to extend to everyone who is on this call. And so thank you, Snowcaps. Thank you, Blue Star, for this phenomenal summit. And we can now move into the question answers. Naina, would you please direct the questions to us?
Sure. I'm requesting participants once again to type in your questions at the top right corner. There is a Q&A tab over there. I have received one question which I have shared on chat with both of you. So
yes.
Have a look at that.
Yes, I've seen that question on integrating environmental regulations with climate targets and whether we should call all of this an EIA kind of environment integrated with many other aspects kind of framework. Martin, would you, or Gil, would you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, I could start. Gil and I, we've known each other for a long time, so I'm not sure the response would be that different, right? No, but in terms of an integrated framework, first of all, I want to say I think the definition ESG is somewhat passé in the sense of talking environment and social, and then governments as a separate. It's about governance of people, planet, and profit. It's governance of the social, economic, and financial aspects, all of it. And that framework, I think, needs to float down into practice into companies. Quite often, this is called bottom line initiatives, which Rupert Rubenstein, which is a friend of both me and Gil as well, has developed over many years. And I think we have all those bits in those frameworks in place. They do exist. It's probably more that the awareness of what is possible and what is available is very low at the board levels and at the management levels. You don't have to invent the word. We spent the last 25 to 30 years doing a lot of work for you guys, right?
Good. So let's spread the good word and let's spread all the experience that you have developed.
I would just add to that, Martin is right. We're very much aligned on many things. I don't know the regulatory environment in India, so I would hesitate to comment on that at all. But I would say, yes, integrate everything. Let's break us out of different compartments that are at war with each other and bring it all together. For me, the key word is not governance with respect, Martin, it's coordination. Governance implies a top-down directive to players of what to do. Coordination suggests a much more horizontal, frankly, conversation, the conversations that a company is, as my mentor, Fernando Flores, would put it, the requests and promises that we make to each other is where the life of business lives. And so that's one of the things we need to reinvent, and that means involving not just the board and the executives and the managers, but the entire rank and file at every level of the organization. The billions of dollars of value that I talked before about disclosing often comes from people on the shop floor, at the loading dock, in the accounting office. Once they understand and share the purpose, they become a fountain of creativity from the bottom up as well as from the top down. So I'm looking for coordination across all these concerns across the entire organization.
Fantastic. The other question that I saw on the chat is about how asset managers and investors are factoring ESG considerations into their decisions. And we, of course, heard from JP Morgan, but I just want to share two statistics with everybody on this call. If 2% of the accumulated wealth of all billionaires is made available for a massive vaccination program, the entire planet can get vaccinated. That's one fact. The other fact, this morning I read that the wealth of our world that we have accumulated over the Anthropocene age is $418 trillion. 1% of that can eliminate our carbon footprint to the extent that we would get to below 1.5 in the period that we need to race towards that objective. Just 1% of that.
Yeah.
Now,
Go
ahead. So in the light of that, I feel that asset managers and investors should simply shut their doors to where they see the potential for not meeting this goal that is so important for all life on this living planet. Cannot allow more than 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Unless you've put your finger on it, it's not for lack of money.
Yep.
Certainly not. It's not for lack of technology. We know how to do what needs to be done. We have the energy technology. We have the piece of the puzzle. Renewables are now less expensive than fossil fuels. There's no reason not to go here. It's a question of will.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Will we do this? Do we want to do this? To your metaphor of shutting the doors to any options of not doing it, we have a powerful story in the mythos of the United States back in the Apollo missions of the 1960s when we were doing, flights to take people to the moon and back. And on the Apollo 13 mission, you may have seen the film of this. There was a horrible catastrophe in the vehicle returning to Earth. We faced the prospect of losing 3 astronauts in deep space. And it's a dramatic film with Tom Hanks, and people in Houston are struggling with the problem. And one of the lines in that movie is, failure is not an option. And that was the guided management frame. If the question is, how do we do better? People will argue endlessly over minor improvements here and there. And if the question is, failure is not an option, what do we do to save ourselves and save life on this planet and the civilization that we know? Then you approach the questions in a very different way. You frame risk in a different way. You do risk evaluations in a different way. You assess cost and benefit in a different way. And if you do that well, you generate unimaginable innovation that doesn't just resolve the immediate crisis, but that trickles to the benefit of everyone.
Absolutely, Jill. I cannot agree more with you. The last question of the day is a very interesting question. And the question is that what is the most powerful thing that ESG adoption can deliver to a corporate? And I would venture to suggest that it can dramatically alter your market cap. And if you're found to be wanting, or if you're found to be greenwashing or cheating on your commitments or your disclosures, you can dramatically lose your market cap. So that's just the financial implication of it. But just imagine making sure that life can continue. What better objective can any corporate really have? And I go back to what you said, Jill. Business in service of life. That is what ESG can deliver. I'd request both of you to add your own punch to what can ESG deliver.
Yeah, from my perspective, as I said, ESG is the same thing as sustainability for business. And if we take another analogy, it's like if we in humanity have been playing a game like football for the last 100 years, it's not about changing the rule for footballs. We're playing a totally new game going forward. It's a new era, as Gil was saying, and ESG can help and guide boards, management, employees, consumers, everybody on what are the rules of this game. How do we need to act and what do we need to learn? The passion is there in people. They want to do good. They want to live in a fashionable, a fresh world, right? But we can breathe the air, drink the water, swim and see fish that are fresh, not full with plastics. That would be my note.
Yeah. There's nobody who doesn't want that. Paul Hook, in his new book, Regeneration, just came out yesterday, used to say that there's nobody who goes to work in the morning intending to make the world worse, more polluted, more suffering. But that's a side effect of the game that we play. It's embedded in the rules that we play. If our companies are focused on short-term profit and not attention to externalities, managers will act a certain way. We had a client years ago. The company had set one of the earliest and boldest goals of sustainability of any company in the world. And we was talking with one of the executives, and he said, I got a real challenge. The company is telling me to go that way. They're rewarding me to go that way. What do I do? Even as a concerned, compassionate person, he was in a dilemma of how does he resolve those. So games are invented by people. We invent the rules. We invented football. We invented basketball. We can invent a game with different rules that support the coordination of individual people in the common direction and common purpose that we share. So as to where you started, it's not just the risk of collapsing your market cap, which will happen to some companies and perhaps some industries. We forget that the Fortune 500 is a very temporary list. Some companies appear and disappear on that, like corks. But so the opportunity isn't just the collapse of market cap, but the growth of market cap in recognition of successful service around the common human agenda.
Absolutely. With that, friends, I end this summit with just one word: act now. Thank you all. It has been totally enriching. I'm absolutely delighted and full of gratitude to every one of you who has spent so much time, effort, so much of your commitment, your passion, and really delivered something that we can all remember for a very, very long time. Thank you very much.